Welcome to Mormon Land, where we explore news in and about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm senior religion reporter Peggy Fletcher-Stack. Joining me is senior managing editor David Noyce, who oversees our faith coverage. Hi, Dave.
Hello, Peggy.
Before we start, here's a quick ask. We invite you to go to patreon.com, where you can access all the Tribune's faith coverage, ad-free podcast episodes, and the full Mormon Land newsletter. Again, that's Patreon, patreon.com/MormonLand. And if you haven't already, follow us on Instagram at mormon.land. Now for today's episode. William Clayton is likely known to most members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as the author of the beloved pioneer hymn, Come, Come Ye Saints. To historians, though, Clayton was a key figure in Mormonism's beginnings, especially during the years in Nauvoo, Illinois. He served as secretary and scribe for church founder Joseph Smith, keeping a detailed diary of all the happenings and controversies during that pivotal period. He recorded Smith dictating passages in the faith's Doctrine and Covenants, including the section about polygamy, or plural marriage as it was known. For more than a century, the church kept a tight lid on Clayton's journals, allowing only select scholars access to them. But next year, the Utah-based Faith is publishing the full record with careful annotations through Yale University Press. Even before the publication, however, Clayton's account has been questioned by those who do not believe Smith practiced polygamy. Here to discuss Clayton and his journals are two Latter-day Saint historians, Matthew Groh, Managing Director of the Church History Department, Matthew McBride, Director of Publications for the department. Both have been involved with the Clayton Project. Matt, welcome.
Thanks, Peggy. It's great to be here.
All right. Let's start with the easy question. Which one of you wants to take it? Tell us a little bit about William Clayton and his journals and what makes them so controversial. Matt McBride, do you want to take that?
Sure. And William Clayton is a convert to the church. He emerges on the scene in Nauvoo as a really critical figure, as you've suggested. He was a record keeper, professional record keeper, and was a scribe and secretary for Joseph Smith. He's responsible for keeping many of the most important records and documents that we have that document the time of the saints in Nauvoo. He's involved with the creation of the Council of 50 Minutes. He keeps Joseph Smith's private journal for a period of time, and he keeps his own detailed journal between 1842 and 1845. One of the reasons that his journal is so interesting to us as historians is because he's one of the few people who documented in any kind of substantial way what was then a very private practice, which was the practice of plural marriage that had been introduced in Nauvoo by Joseph Smith in their early years there, and was kept largely from public view. And very few people kept detailed records of what life was like in that practice, what Joseph Smith said about it. That's not to say that William Clayton's journal says a lot about what Joseph Smith taught or gives us a tremendous amount of detail, but it is more detailed than almost any other source. So that's what kind of places at the center of this, maybe some of the questions and controversies. Beyond that, the thing I think our team's most excited about, because some of those more controversial passages have been available to the public for many years. We're excited because Clayton's journal is one of the most remarkable records of social life in Nauvoo, of Joseph Smith's day-to-day dealings, of the construction of the Nauvoo temple, and many other really important questions to us. And so to be able to bring that to the public and make it available, that's what energizes us about this right now.
So something happened decades ago. Matt Groh, some notes on his journals were stolen. Some scholarly notes were stolen, published by anti-Mormons Gerald and Sandra Tanner. What was the nature of that material, and why did it cause such a stir back then?
It caused a stir because it was excerpts, notes taken from the journal about the more controversial aspects that William Clayton wrote about. So passages about plural marriage, passages about temple ceremonies, those sorts of things when they were published attracted a lot of attention. And like Matt mentioned, this for us means that the most controversial passages have been available for decades. The passages about plural marriage have long been out there. And what this new publication does is it fills in all the gaps about everything else that was going on in Nauvoo.
So, because a lot of our listeners may not know, Matt McBride, we'll start with you. What evidence appears in Clayton's journals that show Joseph married multiple women?
Well, I think,
like, how's it recorded?
Right. I'll just point to what I think is the most significant entry, which is William Clayton's journal entry. It's on a day in July of 1843. It's the date on which what is currently Section 132
July
of the
12th,
Doctrine and Covenants
right?
was dictated. That's right, July 12th. William Clayton is involved in the creation of that document initially, and he records in his journal that Joseph Smith received a revelation relating to the practice of biblical figures entering into these plural marriage arrangements, and how that relates to the restored church in that moment. And I think that's the most important journal entry. Now, there are other journal entries that document Clayton's practice of plural marriage and that point to tensions between Joseph and Emma over the practice, and then a few entries that are written kind of a little bit cryptically, but clearly enough for us to understand that there were some of that they represent accounts of some of Joseph Smith's sealings to other women.
Matt Grove, do you want to add to that?
There is a fair amount of information, like Matt mentioned, about William Clayton's own introduction to the concept of plural marriage and authorization from Joseph Smith to practice plural marriage. So it gives us an insight into how men and women as well were introduced to this idea of plural marriage and then authorized by Joseph Smith to practice it. So it's really the best on the ground record of what it might have meant for someone to practice plural marriage in Nauvoo.
These happened before July 1843, though, right? Some of these that are recorded.
That's right.
So what happens on July 12th? What do we learn from that? Besides dictating essentially the quote revelation,
right? So that's the core of it, right? So it seems clear that Joseph Smith has had these concepts, this revelation in his mind before this date, before it is recorded. There's clear evidence that that Joseph Smith and others have begun to practice plural marriage before it's written down on paper. And you have to understand the context here is that everyone, Joseph Smith, William Clayton, everyone wants this to be kept from public view, right? It's born in a moment of great concern that if this practice were revealed, that it would lead to opposition, lead to persecution against the church. And so there is this real concern that it be kept secret.
And it's not widely known in the church, is it?
That's right. Mm-hmm. That's right. And that's one of the reasons why it's valuable to see how someone like William Clayton may have been introduced to the practice, that a church leader, Brigham Young or Joseph Smith, in William Clayton's case, both of them went to him to teach him about plural marriage, and then he said, "Is this something that I could pursue?"
Could you talk about when it's presented to Emma?
So we don't get any knowledge on that from the journals. We do understand that. There was discussion between Joseph Smith and William Clayton about plural marriage, and between Emma Smith and William Clayton about plural marriage, and that William Clayton is really a confidant to both Joseph and Emma. And so we do have some insights into some of the tensions that existed over plural marriage within the Smith household, and how some of those tensions were worked out over time. So we don't get insights into the moment that Emma was introduced or how that happened.
it seems like most historians who study this believe some of Joseph's plural marriages did include physical intimacy. Did Clayton ever record any evidence of that?
Not for Joseph Smith, no.
Okay.
That mostly comes from later affidavits.
Right. It would have come from later affidavits or later statements by some of Joseph Smith's wives using 19th century euphemisms.
Are there other issues besides polygamy in the diaries that caused church leaders concern? You mentioned the Council of 50.
Yeah, so the Council of 50 was a confidential group that was established about 3 or 4 months before Joseph Smith died, and its purpose was to explore other places where the Latter-day Saints could live if they needed to leave Nauvoo. So the writing's already on the wall. They already understand that they may need to leave Nauvoo. So they're looking at Texas, which is an independent nation. They're looking at California, which at the time is held by Spain. They're looking at various options, and within the Council of 50, they also talk about, well, what would the correct government of the kingdom of God be? And so they're using words like theocracy that aren't popular words in the 1800s in 19th century America. And so there is concern at the time that the Council of 50 be kept confidential, that these discussions be kept confidential. And when the Council of 50 minutes were published as part of the Joseph Smith papers some years ago, I think that historians found great interest. But if you were to read through those minutes, there's not a lot of shocking material in them.
Well, let me ask, Matt McBride, let me start with you. Why have the church kept these journals tucked away for so long? What was the church worried about now?
Well, it's a great question, and I mean it's hard to go back and understand and know what all of the thinking was. I mean, as we've thought about it, we try to recognize, of course, that that was all mostly happening kind of during the mass media age when this is how organizations behaved, and you have your message, and of course the church's primary message and focus is on preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ, and a lot of times they would look at something that they felt was an arcane, maybe historical matter, controversial though it may be, and say that's not central to what we're here to do. And of course, we've seen over the past few decades a willingness on the part of church leaders to kind of make those materials available, to be more transparent about those aspects of our history. The Joseph Smith papers, of course, being the premier example. And it was during our work on the papers that the First Presidency gave us permission to publish the Clayton Journal. And of course, we had an obligation to finish those papers first, which we did. And no sooner had we kind of completed that work than we turned, I think, probably our best team of Nauvoo scholars from the Joseph Smith papers to work on the Clayton Journal. Of course, it takes time to do the work that we do to prepare them. We wanted to give the Clayton Journal the same treatment that we gave the Joseph Smith papers because it's such an important document relating to Joseph Smith's life.
Why go through Yale University Press and not, say, Church Historians Press or something?
It's a great question, too. We just wanted to publish this with a reputable academic press. We felt like Yale we're so excited. It's the best we could do, we thought.
Yeah, and so when we have a book, we just think about what's the best publication outlet. We published books through Oxford University Press before. Now with Yale University Press, we've done them internally with our Church Historians Press. And so we're just always trying to feel like what is going to hit the audience. And this is really a scholarly production, right? You'll pick this up and there's...
It's not a page turner, is what you're saying?
I mean, we like to think that everyone's we like to think everyone's as excited about details of 1840s Nauvoo as we are, but we're realists. This is a scholarly book, right? This is not going to be a beach novel. And every page has extensive footnotes where we're bringing in other records to shed light on it. So that was one of the impulses. Let's go with an academic press Let's go with the best academic press that we can find, and that's what led us.
I was just wondering if, because there's some controversy surrounding these diaries, if the church, if you felt it gave it more credibility. Do you know if it's going through an outside press than an inside press?
As historians who work for the church, we're always balancing this question of credibility. We know that that in certain sectors, the very fact that we work for the church makes what we do questionable or easy to question, and so we have no doubts about that. And so we do want it to be perceived as credible, and we do that both by the excellence of the work and by being as transparent about our process as we can be, and then in this case by working with an outside partner like Yale.
That does great peer review. We were able to overcome some potential objections to our work on the Joseph Smith papers by involving this board, of a national advisory board of really respected scholars and reviewers. Of course, that board is now dissolved since the papers are done, and it just made sense for us in this case to publish with Yale and submit to their peer review process.
And we faced the same question with the Joseph Smith papers. As we began that project, we knew that people would have questions. Is this a credible enterprise? And we knew that we had to establish the credibility by the excellence of the work, by involving scholars not of our faith tradition to review it, to check what we were doing. And with the papers, we really feel like it's been a success. That outside scholars, some of the best scholars on American history, point people to the papers and they say, this is really excellent work. This is a model for how other documentary editing projects like this could be done.
So, Macro, I'm going to ask you a sort of an analytical question. It seems like the church and the critics have come full circle. For a long time, the church played down the founder's practice of polygamy, while critics wanted to, quote, out him. Now the church openly admits Joseph was involved in it, and the critics are arguing that he wasn't. How do you explain that?
Well, of course, there's many critics, and they exist across a large spectrum. And so
we lumped them all together here.
Like, so weird.
Some critics still believe that Joseph Smith practiced polygamy. It is sort of an interesting moment in time, right? And one way to think about this would be the trajectory of what was once known as the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The Reorganized really coalesces as a group in the mid-1800s, in the years after Joseph Smith's death. And one of the key differentiators is their claim that Joseph Smith did not practice polygamy. Mm-hmm. And of course, over time, in the last decades of the 20th century, historians and other leaders of the Reorganized Church looked at the evidence and said he did practice polygamy, right? And that was part of the transition of the Reorganized Church, now called Community of Christ. And so it is this kind of interesting moment. I mean, Matt said earlier that the core mission of the church is to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ, right? It's not to get into historical debates, and so there's never been a desire to trumpet historical controversies or to lead with them. But it is for those of us who work in the 19th century past, the evidence feels so overwhelming that polygamy began with Joseph Smith, that plural marriage began with Joseph Smith, that it is a surprising twist.
So why do some faithful members have a hard time accepting that Joseph practiced polygamy? I mean, when I step back from this, it seems to me like stronger evidence of the church's truth claims would be it did start with the founder. Why do you think, I mean, I remember when the church's essay came out about this. Why do members in the tent, members in the pews, have a hard time accepting that? Matthew Groh, do you want to start? And then Matt
I'd
McBride?
say maybe a couple of things. One is plural marriage is just a really challenging topic, and we can't pretend otherwise, right? It can be very emotional. It can be very difficult for people to think about, to imagine, to confront, right? So I think that is one of the cores of it. It's just a really hard topic. Second of all is that, as we mentioned earlier, polygamy began in a moment in which secrecy, confidentiality was important. And because of that, the records that were created were often cautious, often referred to it in oblique kind of ways. And there's not as many records created at the moment as might have been true for other topics, right? And so there are some challenges with the documentary record. And the documentary record does have contemporaneous records, things that were created in Nauvoo, like the William Clayton Journal, but it's not the only record. And then there are other records that were created later. And among these, the most substantial are affidavits that were taken in the late 1860s. Dozens of affidavits were taken by people with knowledge of plural marriage in Nauvoo. People who were sealed into a plural marriage, people who performed the marriages, people who witnessed the marriages. And so dozens and dozens of Latter-day Saints in the 1860s, men and lots of women, swore affidavits of that the practice had begun in Nauvoo with Joseph Smith. So the evidence is really substantial. But I think it's both the emotional nature of the topic, and then we do have less records than
Matt
we might.
McBride, why do you think some members have a hard time with this?
I don't know if I have much to add. I mean, it is challenging, and I don't blame people for having questions about it. It's something we all kind of have to work through in our own way. But the question about the historical evidence is really what has become the focus of these conversations right now. And I think a lot of it has to do with kind of trying to line up some of Joseph Smith's public statements, which denied his involvement and the involvement of others in plural marriage. We think often using very carefully chosen language to distinguish what they were doing as an approved kind of revealed practice, and polygamy or spiritual wife or other non-approved instances of those kinds of marriage relationships. But there's that. There are those public statements, and then you have all of these other records, the Clayton Journal and others, and then the later affidavits. And so people are just kind of wondering, okay, does it make more sense that Joseph Smith was trying to protect himself, his family, his followers from the potential fallout and consequences of this becoming public? Or is there some conspiracy involved in the creation of all of these other records? And we would look at that and say that the conspiracy idea doesn't hold, that it's untenable, and that the best explanation of all of the evidence is that he's practicing plural marriage and then acting in good faith the best way that he can to protect his
I was
followers.
wondering if it was the way it was done, not just the fact that it was secret, but that he married younger women, teenage girls essentially, and also was sealed to people who had husbands. I mean, does that play a part in this, you think, at all, as does some of the reluctance?
I think that plays into this just this whole question of the emotional nature of the topic, right? That it's
Polygamy's challenging.
Polygamy's challenging, and the way it was practiced can be challenging. And I remember once a seminar I went to when I was an undergraduate student at BYU, and Richard Bushman at the time was working on Rough Stone Rolling, and he was presenting a chapter, and the chapter had to do with plural marriage. And there was another historian in the room who at the end of the conversation said, "Richard, great presentation. I think you're wrong. You're saying that Joseph was maybe sealed to 33 women. I think it's actually 34. And Richard Bushman said, "Oh, that's great. We need to get the details right." He said, "But the real question is not 33 to 34. It's 1 to 2." right. And so that is the core, right, of the challenge. And of course, Latter-day Saints today have grown up in a monogamous world, right? And so it's hard to think about our spiritual ancestors, right, who confronted a very different time.
I think it's fair to add too that, and I don't want to minimize anything, but at the same time, I think it's fair to say that the involvement of younger women in some of these marriages it feels more difficult for us today than it might have for people living in Joseph Smith's time.
And this whole conversation is fascinating because about a decade ago, when we were proposing that we publish the William Clayton journals, really what we were hoping to do is not to enter into a debate about did Joseph Smith really practice plural marriage, but it was to say this is an amazing journal. If you want to learn about the culture of Nauvoo, this is a city of bands and concerts and parades, and William Clayton's in the thick of all that. If you want to learn about, what was that?
He's a musician.
Yeah. If you want to learn about the social life of Nauvoo, this is a terrific journal. I mean, sometimes we think that we just have lots and lots of journals from the Latter-day Saint past, and that is true, but it's not very true of Nauvoo. It's not very true of the early years. It's more true once we get to Utah, and so it's actually quite rare that we have a detailed day by day, week by week account of what's going in Nauvoo. What are the priorities? What are the plans? What's exciting that day?
Produced contemporaneous.
Yeah.
I guess we all have a tendency to think history jumps from historic moment to historic moment. We forget what's in between all those, quote, historic moments, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so I want to go back a little bit to something you said, but maybe Matt McBride can also speak to this. Again, the polygamy deniers are saying that Joseph F. Smith, who was the church president, was, I guess, Hiram Smith's son. And he was leader, kind of contesting a little bit with the RLDS president over these issues. And they are trying to claim that really Brigham Young is the one who started it all, and that Clayton, possibly Joseph F. Smith, might have doctored or pressured, and including also pressuring the women affidavits, which I guess, I haven't read them, but read a lot alike. I mean, there was a kind of format to it. And they're saying, well,
legal documents.
He pressured them to say the same thing or whatever. Well, like, obviously, you say there's plenty of evidence, but could he have done that? I mean, is that possible?
I mean, I'll jump in here for just a second. Speaking specifically to the Clayton Journal, and
yes,
in part because the Clayton Journal really is a key document.
Yes,
it's important as contemporary evidence that Joseph Smith received that revelation and introduced that practice.
Yes.
So, and so we look at it and we're saying, was this an authentic, contemporaneously created journal representing the events just the way it says it does, or could it plausibly have been a forgery in the 1850s, like some have claimed? The first thing we would say is, okay, the books in which the journal are written are very clearly books that were acquired in Nauvoo. They're the same kinds of journals that other record keepers in Nauvoo have purchased. We can sit them next to each other. We know where the books themselves came from. And then you look at the contents of the journal, and this is getting back to something Matt said earlier about beach reading, but there are hundreds upon hundreds of minute details about financial transactions and land records that Joseph Smith is involved in Nauvoo, just throughout the journal, because Clayton is there watching all of this happen. And our team over years has worked to try to contextualize all of those, and we're able to corroborate all of those things from the lot to the purchaser to the price to the date that it was recorded on. And that information that we've gathered at great expense and pain is found in many, many disparate records that are kind of scattered all over creation. There's not really an opportunity for William Clayton or anyone else at any point, especially after they leave Nauvoo, to be able to go through and reconstruct a narrative that detailed that matches those dozens of other records. Some of them are in deed books that are collecting dust in courthouses in Illinois and Iowa. Some of the information would have to come from like the Newell K. Whitney family's papers. It's just kind of all over, but you see it all there in the Clayton Journal in a way that we would look at it and say that only could have been produced by somebody who was living through that day to day. And those are just a few examples of the things there are many other things we could say about it. But we've done so much work as we've tried to prepare this journal for publication to really understand it. We're not just reading a kind of a hastily created transcription of the journal for a few months and kind of throwing some ideas out there. We've looked at it very carefully for years. We have 3 scholars who between them have 50 years experience working on documents like this that have gone through to do that careful work of corroborating these. We have very high degree of confidence that that's an authentic.
Have you done any kind of handwriting analysis?
Handwriting analysis is always a part of the work that we do. We have some of the world's experts on that. We also look at the documents and say, well, what about the ink flow? What can we learn about William Clayton's journal writing practices? It's just these odd little things that we nerd out about, but it looks like he sits down at the end of his day. These are office journals. They sit in an office. He's not taking them home. He'll keep loose notes or little notebooks, and then he'll come and he'll copy that information in. But it looks like he sits there at the end of the day, writes down what happened the night before, after he wrote his last entry, during the day, and right up to the point where he's going to like close the book and go home. I mean, we're able to go through at that level of detail and get a really good sense of his journal writing practices.
Yeah, I think the one little thing I would add is that 40 years ago, the church and others were victimized by a forger who created documents. And since then, we are exceedingly cautious about these sort of matters. And we have applied every form of expertise that we know of to the journals. And for those of us who have worked on the journals, there's just no doubt that of their authenticity, that this journal was created by William Clayton in Nauvoo. The thousands of details in this journal that then match up with other documents from the time. I mean, if William Clayton says that there was a band recital, you can probably find it in the newspaper. There was a band recital. It's just thousands of details. And to think, is it possible that someone could have done that later? It just really strains credibility.
Before AI, also, by the way. So
Have they always been in the church's possession?
Since pretty early, so they were in Clayton's possession. He brings them to Utah. He's lending these journals repeatedly to the historians who are working on Joseph Smith's history. This is another reason why we have a pretty good sense of their authenticity, because material from these journals are showing up in the history all along the way. He's lending them to them, and at a certain point, he does give them to the historian's office, and they kind of been there ever since. They've been in the churches. The provenance of the journal is very simple and clear.
Yeah, and this idea of other historians in the 19th century using the journals, probably the most important example of that is that 2 sections of our Doctrine and Covenants were taken from William Clayton's journal. Theological Teachings of Joseph Smith in Nauvoo, sections 130 and 131, were taken from the journal.
Actual entries in his journal. Yeah,
I'm dying to ask, how was his spelling and grammar?
He's a pro. The guy's a professional.
Better than some that you see from...
His handwriting is amazing. We go through this process with the Joseph Smith papers where we go through 3 rounds of verification. But like with William Clayton, just to make sure you get the handwriting right, because sometimes the handwriting's really tricky. But William Clayton, it's easy. He just is beautiful. I mean, like Matt says, he's a pro. This is what he does for a living. Right? This is a vocation. Yeah. He knows how to spell. He knows how to write cleanly and all that kind of stuff. It's a joy to work on.
Kind of better than Joseph Smith himself.
Well, better than almost anyone else in Nauvoo, right? This is why he was doing what he was doing.
So we've sort of covered this, but I just want to know this polygamy deniers fight that has emerged. And we've had Matthew Bowman on to talk about it. And why is this surfacing now? What's triggering it? Do you guys have any idea? Matt Groh, do you want to take a stab at that?
Oh, I don't know that I could speak with any insight into the timing of this movement, except that there's a long history in our faith tradition and Community of Christ faith tradition over just because polygamy is a challenging topic. I mean, I really do think that's the core of it, and these debates and concerns about plural marriage will surface from time to time. And of course, we do live in a moment where with social media and with the online digital world that these concerns, I think, can reach a wider audience than perhaps they have in the past.
Yeah, people have platforms, and then the ideas are just more people are aware of some of these.
So the internet sort of changes things too, right?
Sure.
Absolutely. So you've hinted at some of this, Matt McBride, about some of the tidbits in there other than polygamy that are interesting. You mentioned about a musician and day-to-day life. What are some tantalizing things you learned?
Oh my goodness.
That
Well, my first love as a historian was the Nauvoo Temple. This is the first book that I ever published was on the Nauvoo Temple. Mm-hmm. What I wouldn't have given to have William Clayton's journal when I was working on that. It's probably the single best record about the construction of the temple, which to me still feels like one of the most remarkable stories in church history, that you have this cash poor community that's lost everything in Missouri and then figures out a way to bootstrap to get that temple built because they care about it so much religiously, and they're just so driven to do it. And Clayton's journal is such an incredible textured record of how they accomplished it. That for me is one of my favorite aspects of the journal. But yeah, Matt might have other thoughts too.
I do love the temple entries. So he's the temple recorder, which means that he's recording all the donations for the temple. And sometimes he's recording them in a big record book called the Book of the Law of the Lord, right? I mean, there's just this sense that what they're doing is important. It's divinely sanctioned. And you see the sacrifice of people who come and give him things for the temple. And oftentimes it's not cash, right? But it's clothing, or it's things that can be sold. It's donations in kind. And William Clayton just has this front row seat of the devotion of the Latter-day Saints. I was back in Nauvoo a couple of weeks ago, and to think about that beautiful temple built out of their poverty. I mean, it's a remarkable story. Just one other thing that William Clayton gets us right in the room is the fallout from the murders of Hiram and Joseph Smith, right? So when the news comes to the city, he's in all of those meetings. He's hearing about the martyrdom firsthand from Willard Richards and others who were in the room. And just that sense of, he writes on that day, sorrow and gloom was pictured in every countenance. One universal scene of lamentation pervaded the cities. The agony of the widows and orphan children was inexpressible, utterly beyond description. Right? He's there in the room with Emma. He's there in the room with
Lucy too.
And Lucy too, right? Joseph's
mother. Yeah.
Yeah. And so he gets us. I mean, he's not usually when you're in those rooms, it's because you're a community leader, but he's just in all the rooms because he's the recorder and he's the clerk and he's the secretary. And so he just gets you in amazing places. And he does have kind of a gift of language too.
That's nice. Okay, last question to both of you. What should members take away from the full Clayton journals? What should they expect? You've said a lot already, but is there anything else you want to add? Like, overall, what should they?
Besides something to read at the beach next summer when this comes out. For me, it really is that story of the devotion of the saints, right? I mean, you just see he has this vantage point where the gathering to Nauvoo and then the building of that temple it's just an epic story. And he has this front row seat to how women, men, children are making it happen. That's what I love about it.
I can't top what Matt said, but if I could just add something here about the work that we've done to try to present it to the public. There have been excerpts of it available before, as we've suggested. There have been there's a transcription that's floating around the internet that was an early transcription. We're really excited to bring this to the world in the form that we're doing because we think that we're providing a lot of value by putting it through that process that we do for the papers, because you can read the journal, but without understanding the context in which it was written, there's a lot of detail that gets missed, and we've painstakingly tried to go through and provide that context so that we're providing the best experience to people as they read it. They can understand the entries, they know what's going on, know who he's talking about, why he is where he is, and then subjecting it to the peer review and verifying the transcription. We're excited to be able to see this published in that form. We think it's the best way for people to experience what we think is a remarkable document.
Matthew Groh, Matthew McBride, thanks for joining us today. This has been fascinating. Thanks to Dave Noyce.
Always a pleasure.
And to our producer, Chris Samuels. We remind our listeners they can keep up on all the happenings in and about the church by subscribing to the Salt Lake Tribune's free Mormon Land newsletter. Just go to sltrib.com to sign up. We'll talk again next time on Mormon Land.